we are going to start off by, first of all, talking to Richard about the economy in general. So, Richard, you know the economy probably better than anybody at the moment. So what actually is going on there? What's the current state of the economy, and what can we expect to see in the current months that are coming up? I know it's hard to predict. What do you see the future looking like at the moment?
Thanks, David. Yeah, there's probably never been more media activity around some of the economic numbers than there has been over the last couple of months. So I thought today, very briefly, I would start with base rates, because actually that is something that is being talked about an awful lot right now. So if we take a quick look at where base rates stand, we know Bank of England most recently announced the increase 0.5% up to 5%. The reason I like kind of showing on a graph like this is just it makes you remember quite how long we had low bank base rate for. So actually the last time the bank base rate was 5% was in April 2008. But it is definitely one of those things we're experiencing now. And I appreciate there may be some people watching us today who do remember back to November 79, when in fact the bank base rate was 17%, probably looking at that 5% going, what's all the noise about? But actually, it's been so long that we had particularly low rates, obviously, and it bottomed out in March 2020 at 0.1%. And I think that's one of the big factors we are experiencing now, which is for a big chunk of the population, they just haven't experienced rates kind of rising to this level and quite so quickly to this level as well. So that's where we stand at the moment, 5%. And I guess remembering why is this happening? So what the Bank of England are trying to do is if you imagine the UK economy as our car going along very nicely, well, the Bank of England are trying to hit the brake pedal because in spite of what the IMF said going back to earlier in the year, the IMF predicted that, frankly, out of all the G7 countries, Britain would be the worst performing in 2023. It would have a negative economy in 2023. Actually, that's about the last time you heard much from them, because obviously since then, the performance of the economy has been upgraded and upgraded again. And it's probably one of those things where good news doesn't really hit the media that much. But there is good news in that UK PLC overall was doing better than expected. And I guess that translates through to the next topic, which is something that's being talked about equally as much, which is inflation. So I talk about this for anybody that's watching my monthly Citrus Bites videos that are coming out. I've talked about this now probably all the way back to the start of the year. So there's two numbers that you hear talked about. There's the grey line, which is consumer price index inflation, and there's the green line, which is known as core consumer price index inflation. And I guess it's always, well, what's the difference between them? Well, fundamentally, the grey line includes really volatile things such as energy and food. So energy prices we know can go up really quickly, come down really quickly. Likewise, food is proving to be very volatile, and that can really distort the number. So the number perhaps we want to be looking at is the green line. It's the core inflation. And the best way I always talk about that is it's sticky. And the reason the green line matters is because sticky inflation is much harder to try and get out of the economy. So now we're starting to hear core inflation be the one that is talked about a bit more. But on a 12-month rolling basis, we're now up 7.1%. So when you look at that, actually, the other really important point is where some of the news last month when the inflation figures came out was it's flat April to May. That was CPI. Core inflation, which is the sticky one, went up month on month. And that is a concern because it's now at the highest point since March 1992. So we know that core inflation, sticky inflation is proving really, really challenging. And that's certainly a big reason why we're seeing that brake pedal called interest rates continually being pushed to try and slow this down. I'm going to talk a little bit about, just for a moment, why might that be? Why are we experiencing now, in spite of all these bank base rate increases, in spite of all the noise that we're hearing around, the impact that's having on consumers and mortgage payment capabilities, why are we still seeing this inflation number go up, this core inflation number? So I just picked out a couple of bits that I thought might be interesting to look at. The first one is how our mortgage market has changed over the last few years. And I don't want you to worry too much about the indices that you'll see. What I do want you to look at is the colors here. So the colors tell the story. And what we've noticed over the last few years is many more borrowers have gone on to longer term fixed rate products. So I think the view generally is since the start of the bank base rate increase through to the end of 2024, we're predicted about just over 4 million households are going to come to the end of a fixed rate mortgage product. But what's particularly interesting here is the percentage that are on longer term rates, so the 3, 4, 5-year products. And the reason this matters is because in spite of the fact the Bank of England may be pressing that interest rate pedal, trying to slow the economy, actually there's a certain percentage of households that are not impacted. And worth overlaying with that, and this is something, I didn't realize till I started getting under the skin of it more, but we tend to think mortgage, so many people have got a mortgage, and that potentially is true. But when you look at UK households as an overall, 29% of the UK population are in a household where there is a mortgage on it. So 29%. So actually less than a third of UK households actually have a mortgage outstanding. And now we overlay that with the fact that so many of them are being taken over a longer period of time. Hence, we're seeing that distortion between how long it's taking for consumer behavior in many instances to change in spite of those bank base rate increases. And I'm sure Holly will talk a bit more about kind of mortgage rates and the impact of mortgage rates later on. So that's a little bit about one reason why we might be seeing such a delay in consumers changing their spending capabilities. But the other point I wanted to look at was just about jobs, because the other question I get asked is, Richard, how can we have got this so wrong? Couldn't we tell that it was going to be harder to try and crack this inflation? Why are we suddenly seeing such a huge acceleration in bank base rate, which was tend to indicate, is there a bit of panic in there? And I look back at, 2020, 2021, and this is really interesting with the jobs market. And jobs is getting much more noise now around, well, what is fueling some of this inflation? So the grey line is all of the vacancies that exist within the UK, and the green line is unemployment. And what you can see that started happening over 2020, 2021 is the number of vacancies in the economy went up. That meant there just weren't enough people to fill the jobs. And what's happening when there aren't enough people to fill the jobs? Well, typically employers go, we need to hire people. So actually, we're going to need to offer people more money. We want to retain our great people. We want to attract new talent. So we're going to need to pay them more money to do that. How are we going to pay for that? Well, we'll have to put our prices up. So in the end, what you start to see is you start to see employers increasing salaries, wages lead to inflation, and that's driving it. So perhaps actually there was a really early indication available that this is what might be coming down the line. And it probably explains a bit more about why the government are also really, really trying to stick to the public wage increases and saying we are determined not to give big public wage increases to try and put a lid on that inflation. So I guess in reality, we don't hear about some of the good stuff. We don't hear that perhaps new car sales went up for the 10th consecutive month in June. What we do hear about is as there are many people struggling now with the bank base rate increases, but there's a lot of sort of strong economic data underpinning that news as well.